guys, Eddie back with Couch Talk. Welcome back to the show. If it's your first time with us, as always, welcome to the show. Guys, please hit like, please hit subscribe. I promise if you follow me, I will earn your viewership. Today, I want to talk about patriotism. I want to talk about patriotism, and I want to talk about the movement in our society that is very anti-patriotic. And there's a heavy contingent of people that want to do this great reset. That's what we're calling it now. It's based around critical race theory. It's based around the concept that America is systemically racist and always has been, always will be, and the only way to fix it is basically to start over from scratch. And I was thinking about this a lot lately as I realized that there is an analogous situation in my life with my marriage. Now, I don't want anybody to come away from this thinking that I didn't have anything to do with my marriage failing, because I had plenty to do with it, and I own that responsibility. But one of the biggest problems in my marriage was that my ex-wife constantly thought of me in the worst possible light. In other words, everything I did and said was perceived as poorly as possible throughout a great deal of my marriage. And it ran into a lot of problems. So if I do something wrong, I would get the harshest reaction. If I did something right, there was always some sort of suspicion that whatever I did was only to try to game the system or to gain ammunition in some future battle that we were to fight. And despite honorable intentions, much of the time, I faced the brunt of that attack. And I see something very similar happening in America, and I want to address it. America is my home, and I love it. I think it is the best nation on earth. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm racist. It doesn't mean that I hate other nations, because neither of those things is true. But you can still love your home team. How many of you guys are sports fans and you love the Carolina Panthers, or you love Duke or UNC because that's, the local team and that's who you get behind? It's not that you hate everybody else. It's just that you love those teams, or you're going to view those teams in the best possible light. And America should be the same way. It is our home, and we should view what America is and was in the best possible light. Now, that doesn't mean we should be blind to any of the bad history in our past, any of the dark marks, because there's been plenty, and history has a long tail. We shouldn't forget that. But that doesn't mean that we should assume the worst, and I fear that is what is happening in today's society. So, and by the way, a quick tangent on this is, I think we should view each other in the best possible light as well. I think when you look at a fellow American or a fellow human being, I think the benefit of the doubt should almost always be given. And even with evidence to the contrary, I think we should assume that everyone has honorable intentions. Now, that, again, doesn't mean to be blind. If there's blatant obvious evidence to suggest against it, I think it's still important to have good intentions and to assume that they do. But you should also prepare yourself and protect yourself against those that wish you ill. But I see a lot of people, like especially in these political discussions, where they're talking to somebody from across the table, and that person may disagree with them, and that is okay. It is okay to disagree with somebody. That doesn't mean that you should hate that person just because they disagree with you. It doesn't mean that you should immediately think that because they disagree with you that they hate America, or that they have bad intentions, want to destroy the system, or want to kill everything, want to destroy America, want to bring it down. That's the quickest way to lose the argument, to not even be able to start the dialogue, is to have that assumption. So we need to get in the habit of assuming that even our political opponents have honorable intentions, have good goals in mind, and that we just seem to have different ways of getting to them. And that's how we find common ground and then move on from there. So let's talk about critical race theory. Now, even when I was taught history growing up, there was always a veneer of white man is evil. He came over, the Europeans came over and killed the Indians for no reason and kicked them off our land and did all sorts of mean, terrible things to them. And then we had slavery and we were evil again. And then, on and on, Jim Crow and et cetera, until the Civil Rights Movement. And then they kind of, we kind of got a break, I guess, at the Civil Rights moment. They basically kind of gave the evil white man the benefit of the doubt from that point on. And there's a huge movement in our historical context to try to demonize many of our founding fathers, to kind of demonize our official system, our Constitution, our legal system. And don't get me wrong, because I think there's plenty that needs to be fixed in our legal system, especially with the Justice Department. But I need to explain that history isn't supposed to have a veneer. It's not supposed to have a slant. It's not supposed to have a political ideology attached to it. History is supposed to just be history. And there's nothing wrong with just viewing history in its own context, right? We don't have to add anything to it. So when you go through history, tell the truth. Every kid in school should know that when we came over, there were various times where we were the oppressors, where the European came over and destroyed many Indian and Native American lives. I don't know what the current political correct term is. Maybe it's indigenous peoples. I think it's changed a lot, so forgive me if I'm not using the right one. But I think there are plenty of times where we did kick them off their land. Plenty of times where we did deceive them. There were plenty of times when they deceived us as well. But I don't think that of the whole that they were the oppressing peoples. I think the European people were the oppressing peoples. But it's important to understand that today's society doesn't reflect society 300 years ago, okay? And so the people that may look similar to the European people that oppressed the indigenous peoples of America, just because they look similar doesn't mean that they are the same people, or even related to the same people, or even remotely related to the same people. Just because they happen to look similar and have some of the same skin complexions, we need to make sure that we don't think of them as the European oppressors from 250 years ago, because that's just not the case. So history needs to be taught in its own context. We shouldn't try to demonize founding fathers simply because they owned slaves, because at the time that was run of the mill. And it's important to note that people like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, none of them liked the slavery system. And even though they owned slaves, and I think that is a despicable thing, I think to carry slaves, to own another human being is a despicable thing, a disgusting act that should never have taken place. But it did happen. And we shouldn't pretend like it didn't happen ever. But we also shouldn't pretend like they weren't doing exactly what was the norm for their societal understanding. And I don't think that makes it okay for them to have done it. But we should think of that as a mitigating factor. And it's also important to note that both Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, they all hated slavery. Thomas Jefferson outlawed the international slave trade when he was president, and he specifically advocated for gradual emancipation. Benjamin Franklin, he started a society for promotion of the abolition of slavery. I mean, they all hated it. And if you look at the wording of the Constitution, the wording of the Bill of Rights, it was clear that they were trying to establish equality for all humans under the law. Not just landowners, which all it was back then was landowners, not even white people, just landowners were the only people that got all of the rights, all of the benefits. But it was clear that they wanted everyone to have the equality under the law. Not equality of outcome perfectly across the board. That is not what they were shooting for, ever. But they wanted equality under the law. They wanted everyone to have the same opportunities. And I see that so many times we try to demonize them for acts that they have, but we should do both. We should make sure that we know the bad things that they did, and we should make sure that we know the good things they did. Christopher Columbus was horrible to the indigenous people. Horrible. Basically drove them like chattel to try to get gold out of basically impossible situations where there wasn't any gold to be gotten. And even so, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's, by the way, extremely liberal and would be on that crew to demonize people, would still say that he still says that Christopher Columbus was essentially the most monumentous event that ever happened in human history, because it reconnected groups of people that otherwise weren't ever going to have been reconnected. Now, maybe, of course, somebody else would have done it. Leif Erikson maybe did it beforehand in certain ways. There are places, individual places where it could have happened, but he's the one that gets the taco, and there's nothing wrong with that. Should we revere him for what he did? Absolutely. Should we hate him for what he did? Absolutely. But that doesn't take away from what he accomplished. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Should we hate that he owned slaves? Absolutely. But that doesn't take away that he was still one of the most brilliant founding fathers ever to live. Let's talk about statues and monuments. Again, this is a situation where there are some people that have done great things. They've done horrible things. I want everyone to analyze their life, and I challenge you to find the perfection that you are holding these founding fathers to, these people in these statues and monuments to, and see if you have that perfection in your life. I guarantee you we don't. No human is perfect, and no human should be held to a perfect standard. We should abhor the bad things that happened and praise the great things that happened. And some of these guys stood out as truly amazing, truly great. And there is no reason to detract from that greatness. Ever. Ever. Guys, tell me what you think about this. Please post your comments below. I know it's kind of a controversial topic. And I know there's a lot of situations in our history, in our past, that are dark marks. And I don't think that we should ever ignore it. But I also don't think that we should start demonizing a system simply because it had some execution that was imperfect in the beginning. And I think that you should consider that the West is singular in that it actually did get rid of slavery, in that it actually did achieve equality under the law. Perhaps the execution is still imperfect in places. And any place where it is imperfect, we should attack it. We should make sure that it is a perfectly equal system, giving free and equal opportunity to everyone. Not equal result to everyone, but equal opportunities to everyone. Please post your comments below. We'll talk about this more on Couch Talk.